Mark, the movie man, here at the Midwest Weird Fest and a Night of Horror International Film Festival, and I am here with a very talented filmmaker, Ehrland. He just had his film Dooba Dooba show here. How'd that go for you? How do you think it went?
I think it went pretty well. I mean, people seem to respond to it, but
Sure.
Yeah.
It seemed to go well, though?
Yeah, I think so. I hope, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how this came to be, because it's kind of done with that, whatever, the not an avant-garde style, maybe a little bit of an avant-garde style, but more of like that not quite found footage almost. How did you go about choosing this way to shoot this story?
We were talking about doing just a found footage film, like just sort of lower budget and simpler in a lot of ways. And so then we settled on doing security cameras.
Okay.
And it was sort of like, I hadn't seen, maybe there are films that are security cameras.
Not many.
Yeah.
There's not many. I mean, they work the security cameras into it, but usually there's also someone shooting it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they'll cut away to security cameras, but I love the look of security cameras, and it was sort of like, can you do a whole movie with security cameras?
Sure.
That was sort of the challenge. And so it was a lot of just sort of, it was an experiment to kind of see does it work.
And now the talent that you have in here, you have some young talent in here, but they put in a solid performance. Monroe especially. How did you go about finding the talent? Were these people you knew, or did you do some vetting? Or
yeah, that's Betsy Sly. No, she was in my first film, Homestead, and she was great. And so we were like, oh, we should
do another project.
Yeah. Well, her mother was a producer on the project, and so it was like, it was sort of obviously we were going to have Betsy in it. So that was that's how that came about.
I like how the dark tone that you gave this film and where you're going with it, and how it's more than just a found footage film. I felt like you were trying to say a little something maybe about a few other things, like, how mental health is handled in this country and such. Were you going for a little bit deeper things than just the found footage creepy ass family?
Yeah, no, for sure. A lot of that stuff came on like later as we were editing the film. So, these kind of this archival footage, and it was trying to like tie a theme together without being, I don't know, like being
too preachy.
Yeah, it was just difficult, because you're like, oh, I could try to, say this. It was like, oh, you could, but you kind of want to just introduce concepts rather than solve them,
right?
And
now, how many times have you had this at a fest so far?
This is our fourth screening.
Yeah. Excellent. And why Dooba Dooba? As kind of the hook. What went into that decision?
Oh, it's a terrible story.
Well, then please tell it, because everybody loves terrible stories.
Yeah. So I was just writing. I was writing the film, and it was sort of like this babysitter comes over to this house, and as I was writing it, I got to a line, and I wasn't sure what line I was going to write next, and so I just wrote Dooba Dooba as like a joke, just like to fill in words, like to pretend I was right. And then I was like, oh, maybe I'll just leave it there. And then it was like, so why did they say Dooba Dooba? And so that was just how that came about. And then, I didn't have a title for the film.
Sure.
And everyone was just like, yeah, you should probably call it Dooba Dooba. And I was like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. That's pretty good. And you don't get that many opportunities to call a movie Dooba Dooba and justify it. So that was...
It worked out well. It was interesting when you have a number of really cool scenes in here that I loved how you shot it. And then where did you decide where to cut in the footage that you had, the extra footage, like the speeches about the president, because you set it up like a senior project, like someone used this footage in their senior project. But where did you decide put those breaks to put in that other footage outside of the security cam footage?
Yeah, that was tough. It was sort of, I don't know. It was hard to sort of like find the right place for them, and to not allow it to interrupt the momentum of the film, which and I mean, to an extent, I think it kind of does. It's just like it's how it sort of, it needs to frame the next scene,
Sure.
and sort of like frame what you've seen, and like
Right.
and I sort of thought about them as like act breaks,
Sure.
and so you're like, maybe they can happen, every like 10 to 15 minutes. You can't have them like, back to back. So it was sort of difficult to find like where you wanted to put in. Like the first one was a little harder. I was like, okay, yeah, I guess this is, it feels like time has maybe elapsed and you
Right.
sort of experience something else, and like a new sort of setup is happening.
Well, I love too that you put in some dark humor in here. Did the laughs land with the audience where you kind of wanted them?
Yeah, no, they were. I think they were laughing quite a bit. Though that was so. I was happy with that. I told them to laugh beforehand. So yeah, no, I think that they got the jokes and laughed where they were supposed to.
Well, you threw in a local Wisconsin reference with the Dahmer footage, so I think that's why that landed quite as humorous.
No, that always lands.
Does it really?
Yeah. That's one that like I actually didn't really fully like intend it as like comedic.
Sure.
Like I think it's just so shocking to be watching. It's like, oh yeah, it's just like a Jeffrey Dahmer jump scare. It is funny. But yeah, no, it always like consistently gets a laugh. Even where like people haven't laughed that much during it, like that one's always like people are always like, oh, laugh at that one.
Yeah, and for your location that you have a really the house has its own character. And it was all that shot on the same land where you even had the storage container, or did you have two?
Yeah. No, it was actually at a trailer park. And Michelle was, I think she was working for the property, and so they had this house there that was unoccupied, and so we're like, okay, we'll shoot in the house. And then when we were doing like the storage container stuff, that was actually done in reshoots. And we had we were like, okay, there's got to be something on like this property that like
It's creepy, right?
Yeah. So there was just a storage container, a shipping container like in the back. And it was like, okay, we'll use that. And then for the interiors, we actually shot that in the garage because the storage container was a mess.
You wouldn't. Safety among other things.
You can't shoot there.
So how long of a shoot did you have for this?
I think the initial shoot was about 5 days. And then we did reshoots, which I guess like technically lasted 4 days. They were sort of more relaxed because we were just like getting like, some scenes. So it wasn't like, probably like we were goofing off a lot of the time. It was probably like more like a more like an extra day of shooting, is how it probably turned out over the course of 4 days. But yeah, so.
And what would you say was your favorite scene to shoot? We're not giving too many spoilers, but what would you say was one of your favorite scenes to shoot? Well, I should say shoot because you're doing it by security camera. So how'd that work as well?
Yeah. No, it was interesting because you just it's sort of you don't really shoot it. You set up the cameras. What we do is like we'd rehearse sort of like earlier in the day. And then we'd set up the cameras, and then we'd basically just like we'd all go into the other room. And then we'd just be do the scene.
Sure.
And I wrote these really long scenes so that they were kind of like, you're sort of like just gone for like 10 minutes.
Sure.
And then you're like, okay, let's take it again. And then you don't really know what you shot because you're not like watching all the cameras. I always had like one monitor that you could watch, but you're sort of like, let's see.
Whatever you got on the other ones.
Yeah.
And did you have a favorite scene then?
Maybe like the last chase scene.
Oh, sure.
Because that was all like, that was just the first person camera that I was like I was just hiding in the bedroom for that. And so you were just sort of like sitting there, like, I think I was watching like a GoPro on my phone.
Yeah.
But you wasn't like great service, you know, great
Oh,
connection.
sure. Yeah.
So you just like you're like action, and you just hear all this screaming in the next room. Like
You're hoping it's going well, right?
yeah, they like rushed by, and you're like you hear it, you know. So that was just like exciting. It was like
Sure.
you know, so that was probably like the most memorable one.
Cool.
You know, most
Cool.
shouting.
And where do you go from here?
Next we're playing at Panic Fest
Sure.
and
Mhm.
Unnamed Footage Festival at the end of March and beginning of maybe they're both at the end, but yeah, like last weekend in March.
And where can people keep up with your project?
You can follow us on Instagram. It's at Dooba Dooba Film.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Keep an eye out for Dooba Dooba at the fest. It's so worth a watch. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You bet.